Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. I spent most of my childhood on a Greek island, and that kind of place gives children a freedom that feels almost unreal once you grow older and understand how rare it is. Life moved slowly there. People knew each other. Parents were still protective, of course, but the island had a way of making them feel that their children were safer than children in big cities. Because of that, I was allowed to do things that many children could only dream about. I could stay outside until sunset, ride my bicycle for long stretches without anyone following behind me, wander near the woods, and spend whole afternoons inventing adventures with my friends. To us, the island was not just home. It was a world of hidden paths, secret places, old ruins, rocky shores, and endless stories waiting to be discovered. I was a restless child, always searching for something. Some days I was sure I would find buried treasure in the woods. Other days I rode my bicycle along the coast imagining that pirate ships might appear on the horizon. I found nothing of the sort, of course, but that never stopped me from looking. I had a wild imagination, a stubborn streak, and the kind of pride that often gets children into trouble before they have enough sense to avoid it. Looking back now, I can say that out of all the strange moments of my childhood, one memory has remained sharper than the rest. Maybe it stayed with me because of what happened afterward. Maybe it stayed because I was old enough to understand that I had done something wrong, but too young to understand what could follow. Or maybe it stayed because even now, after all these years, the blue coat I wore that day still hangs in the far corner of my closet, as if some part of that day never fully ended. It happened on one of those bright, restless days when a child wakes up already full of energy. I remember opening my eyes and feeling as though I had been pulled awake by excitement. I jumped out of bed before I was fully awake, rushed through breakfast, and listened only halfway as my mother reminded me to be back in time for lunch. She always had to repeat herself when I was in one of those moods. I would nod and say yes without really hearing the words, because my mind was already outside in the sun, already on my bicycle, already searching for my friends. My poor mother knew that look on my face very well. It meant I would spend the day running wild and would return home dirty, hungry, and late. Within minutes I was out the door. The air smelled of salt and warm earth, and the sky was the clear bright blue that makes every childhood memory seem even more vivid. I rode through the familiar roads until I found the others, and before long our little pack was together. There was no plan, which was normal for us. We did not need one. We were children on an island with a whole day ahead of us, and that was enough. We rode our bicycles along the southern coast near the harbor, racing one another, shouting, laughing, and teasing each other over the smallest things. One would speed ahead and the rest would chase. Another would claim to know a secret path or a better view and lead us somewhere pointless, and we would still follow because that was part of the fun. The hours passed in the careless way they only can when you are young. Morning became afternoon and afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. At some point we should have gone home for lunch. At some point we should have thought about our parents, about rules, about getting back before sunset. But none of that mattered then. We were having too much fun, and every little adventure made the next one feel possible. We rode farther than we meant to, stopped where we wanted, told stories, argued, laughed again, and felt wonderfully free. By late afternoon we were tired enough to rest, so we gathered near an old graveyard that stood a little apart from everything else. Even before that day, it had always made us uneasy. It was old and quiet and abandoned in a way that felt heavier than simple neglect. The iron gate at the entrance looked severe even in daylight, and the place behind it seemed swallowed by silence. Wild plants had grown in places where they should not have, and from outside the wall you could already sense that it was a place people had stopped caring for long ago. To children like us, that kind of place was irresistible. It frightened us, yes, but it also pulled at our curiosity. So we settled ourselves outside that graveyard as if we were camping near the edge of some forbidden kingdom. We leaned our bicycles nearby, dropped down to the ground, and began doing what children always do when they are in the right place at the right hour. We told ghost stories. We repeated old island tales we had heard from grandparents, neighbors, older cousins, and fishermen who liked to make children shiver for fun. Every whisper of wind suddenly mattered. Every sound felt suspicious. Every glance toward the iron gate made our skin prickle just a little more. The sun was lowering by then, and the shadows around us had begun to stretch long and thin. It was the perfect time to scare one another, and we knew it. Sophia, who was one of the oldest among us, loved that kind of moment. She knew how to hold our attention. She also knew how to enjoy the power that came from being the one who controlled the story, and the fear that followed it. As the light dimmed and the graveyard behind the gate darkened, she began telling us about a dead bride. According to the story, the bride had been betrayed by the man she was meant to marry. She died heartbroken, or angry, or both, depending on which version someone had heard. Sophia told it in a low voice, slowly, letting every detail settle into us. She described the abandoned graveyard as if the whole terrible story had happened right there where we sat. She spoke of the faithless groom, the wrong done to the bride, and how death had not ended her anger. By then even the boldest among us were glancing nervously toward the gate. The story wrapped itself around the place so perfectly that it became hard to separate what was real from what was imagined. I remember feeling more and more uncomfortable as she spoke. There was a pressure in the air, or at least it seemed that way to me. I had the distinct feeling that someone was watching us. Even now I can remember that sensation, not seeing anything, not hearing anything, but feeling observed. Still, I refused to show fear. I had a reputation among my friends for being brave, and I clung to it stubbornly. I was afraid that if I turned too quickly or stared too long at the graveyard, they would notice how unsettled I felt. So I acted calm even when I was not. By the time Sophia reached the end of the story, all of us were drawn tightly together. She finished with the dead bride taking the life of her disloyal groom, and she did it with such satisfaction that I can still picture her face. The others were terrified. I could see that Sophia was proud of herself for having scared everyone so badly. Maybe that was what pushed me into speaking. Maybe I wanted to break the spell she had cast over us. Maybe I simply could not stand the smug look on her face. Whatever the reason, I made the mistake that changed everything. In a sarcastic voice, I said something like, "Right. And then what?" She jumped back into her grave with an everlasting smile on her face. A smile that travelers can still see if they pass by at night? The words were barely out of my mouth before the whole group exploded into laughter, shock, and noise. Some of them gasped. Some shouted at me for saying such a thing. Sophia narrowed her eyes in that way older children do when they think they have just found the perfect chance to put someone in their place. She challenged me at once. If I thought it was all nonsense, then I should go in and prove it. Not only that, but I should bring back something to show I had really gone inside and had not just hidden near the bushes. It was exactly the kind of challenge a child cannot easily refuse when pride is louder than good sense. The moment the challenge was spoken, I knew I was in trouble. A wiser child would have laughed it off. A wiser child would have said no and gone home. But I was too proud, too stubborn, and too determined not to let Sophia call me a coward. So although fear was already rising in me, I stood up, pretended I did not care, and climbed over the old iron gate. I still remember the cold feeling that ran through me as I crossed from one side to the other. On the outside, I was a child among friends. On the inside, I was alone. Someone shouted after me not to take too long because they might not wait. I heard laughter. I heard Sophia's voice. But under all that noise there was another voice, quieter and more serious, the voice inside my own head telling me not to do this. Even then, even in my foolish youth, I understood that I was doing something wrong. In our culture, we were taught to respect the dead. Cemeteries were not places for games. Graves were not places for dares. Yet I kept going, because the shame of turning back seemed worse than anything I might find inside. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. The graveyard was more broken than I had realized from the outside. There were graves that had cracked open, tombstones that had fallen, stones that had shifted and tilted over time. Plants had grown where they should not have, and the whole place seemed full of neglect. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the sadness of it. It did not feel like a place at peace. It felt forgotten. That feeling, more than the ghost story, unsettled me deeply. I moved carefully, my heart pounding, forcing myself forward while every step made me want to turn and run. Then I saw it, an open grave. The tombstone had broken apart, and pieces of it lay piled near the opening. I stopped at once. For a moment I could not move. I remember whispering a prayer under my breath, not because I knew exactly what to say, but because it felt like the only thing to do. The evening was slipping toward darkness, and I knew I could not stand there forever. If I wanted proof for the others, this was it. So after a long moment of hesitation, I bent down and stretched my arm inside the opening. I did not know what I expected to touch. Cold stone, perhaps? Loose dirt. But instead my hand found something hard and solid. My fingers closed around it, and I pulled it out. It was part of a human pelvis. Even now those words feel strange to say, but that is what it was. The bone had been exposed for some time, worn by sun and rain, changed by weather, but unmistakably human. The second I realized what I was holding, fear went through me so sharply that I nearly dropped it. Yet at the same time I felt a sick sort of triumph. I had done it. I had gone into the graveyard, found proof, and survived. That thought was enough to keep me moving. By then the light had faded even more. I hurried back toward the gate holding the bone, wanting only to be out of that place. But when I reached the entrance, the group was gone. Only Sophia and Nikki remained. Their faces were not what I expected. Instead of being impressed, they looked annoyed, almost upset, as if my success had spoiled something for them. They examined the bone, saw that I had really been inside, and then casually announced that they had to go. A moment later they were on their bicycles and leaving me behind. I stood there baffled, bones still in my hands, the evening darkening around me, and something in me shifted. The childish thrill drained out of the moment. All that remained was the ugly truth of what I had done. I had taken human remains out of a grave just to win an argument, and prove I was not afraid. Suddenly that felt unbearable. I could not just throw the bone aside and ride away. I had already been disrespectful enough. I knew I had to put it back. So I climbed into the graveyard again. This time there were no laughing friends outside, no challenge driving me on, no anger towards Sophia to make me forget myself. There was only guilt. The place felt even darker now, and because I had come in once already, I knew more clearly what kind of ground I was walking on. I searched for the open grave for what felt like a very long time. In the fading light, everything looked different. The broken stones cast strange shapes. The paths I thought I remembered seemed uncertain. I was frightened, nearly in tears, and desperate to find the opening so I could undo what I had done. At last I found it. I placed the bone back inside with shaking hands. I do not remember the exact words I whispered, but I know I apologized. I know I cried. I know I wanted more than anything to leave that place, and to somehow take back the whole day. As I made my way home, a bitter feeling stayed with me. I kept thinking the same thing over and over. I should have stayed quiet. I should have said nothing. I should never have gone in. By the time I reached home, I was exhausted, dirty, and miserable. I let my bicycle fall carelessly to the ground outside and went inside expecting trouble, and trouble was exactly what I found. My mother was furious. I had missed lunch, disappeared for far too long, and come home in a state that clearly showed I had been somewhere I should not have been. I still remember her anger, though much of the evening is blurred now. I remember her scolding me. I remember that dinner was no longer an option. I remember her noticing my coat, muddy and filthy, and waving it in front of me while demanding to know what I had done. The coat was blue, and I can still picture the mud on it. I also remember the final sharp sound of my bedroom door slamming shut behind me after she sent me inside. I lay awake for hours that night replaying everything. The gate. The graveyard. The bone. The moment of putting it back. My mother's anger. The shame of it all. Fear and guilt kept circling in my mind until sometime in the early morning, I must have finally fallen asleep. Then I heard the voice. Even now I can hear it in memory, clear and sharp, and it still unsettles me. The voice was angry. It said, "Have I ever broken into your house and disturbed your sleep? Have I ever misplaced your clothes?" I woke in terror, drenched with sweat, the words echoing in my head. It did not feel like an ordinary dream. It felt like I had been confronted. My mother rushed into the room after hearing me, held me, and assured me that it had only been a nightmare. I wanted badly to believe her. I let her comfort me, and eventually I fell asleep again, though not peacefully. The next morning she came into my room and asked what had happened to my coat. At first I thought she meant the mud from the previous day and did not understand why she was asking again. But then I realized she meant that same morning. She told me she had washed the mud off the coat the night before, yet when she looked at it that morning, it was dusty again. Not muddy. Dusty. She wanted to know whether I had touched it after she had cleaned it. I had not. I told her so. Then, overcome by guilt and fear, I confessed everything. I told her about the graveyard, the challenge, the bone, and the disturbing dream. As I spoke, I broke into tears again. She was angry, yes, but also disturbed. Still, she tried to remain firm. She set down rules. She told me never to do such a thing again. She reassured me as best she could that there was nothing to worry about if I stayed away from that place and did not repeat such behavior. I stayed indoors that whole day, too shaken to do anything else. I hoped that would be the end of it. But the next morning brought something even worse. My mother rushed into my room again, this time with my grandfather. Both of them looked serious in a way that frightened me at once. She asked again whether I had touched the coat. Again I said no. Then my grandfather told me to get up and show him the old cemetery. I cannot properly describe how I felt in that moment. My stomach dropped. Fear rushed through me. I did not want to go back. I did not want to see the place again. But neither of them would accept refusal. So I got dressed, and with a sense of dread I led my grandfather there. On the way, he asked me questions about the dream. He wanted to know whether the voice had given me a name. He repeated the question more than once, almost as if he hoped I would remember something I had not understood at the time. But the voice had not given a name. It had only spoken those angry words. Eventually he stopped asking. When we reached the graveyard, we went inside together. In daylight it was less frightening, but not less sad. We searched for the open grave where I had found the bone. Then we searched for the place where I thought I had returned it. But despite circling the interior again and again, we could not find it. That was part of what made the whole thing worse. In the darkness of the previous evening, I had acted in panic. Now, in daylight, the layout seemed different. The certainty I had felt about where I had been disappeared. We looked and looked, but with no result. At last my grandfather decided that if we could not find the grave, then the only proper thing left to do was to bring a priest and have him read prayers there, with me present. The dead, he believed, had to be eased. Whatever disturbance had been caused needed to be addressed with respect. I remember feeling both ashamed and relieved. Ashamed because my foolish behavior had led to this. Relieved because the adults were now taking over, doing what I no longer knew how to do. The priest came, and prayers were read. I stood there and listened. I do not remember every word, but I remember the seriousness of it, the weight of the moment, and the sense that what had happened was not something to laugh away. Whether one believes in the supernatural or not, there are lines that should not be crossed. That was what I had learned. A grave is not a place for pride. The dead are not there for games. Respect is not just tradition. It is protection too, perhaps in more ways than we fully understand. As for the coat, that is its own strange part of the story. My mother wanted to throw it away many times. She never liked keeping it after what happened. But somehow it remained. Even now, 22 years later, it still hangs in the far corner of my closet. Time has passed. I am no longer the child who raced down the coast on a bicycle, eager for adventure and too proud for wisdom. I have lived enough life since then to know how small and foolish I was that day. And yet, every now and then, I still find myself looking at that coat. It hangs a little apart from the others, almost forgotten and yet never fully ignored. Sometimes I have to vacuum the dust from beneath it, and every time I do, the memory comes back. Not just the memory of the graveyard or the dream, but the memory of how easily children can step over a line without understanding what that line protects. I think of the feeling of being watched outside the gate. I think of the open grave in the dark. I think of the bone in my hand and the taste of bitterness on the way home. I think of that furious voice in the night asking whether it had ever disturbed my house or touched my things. Was it only a nightmare shaped by guilt? Was the dust on the coat something ordinary that happened to appear at the worst possible time? Was the whole thing a child's mind trying to make sense of fear, shame, and superstition? Perhaps. I cannot prove otherwise. But I know what I felt then, and I know how deeply it marked me. Some experiences do not need proof to remain powerful. They stay because of what they teach you. That day taught me that courage and pride are not the same thing. It taught me that fear is sometimes wisdom speaking. It taught me that silence would have saved me more trouble than any clever remark ever could. Most of all, it taught me that there are places where the living should tread lightly, with humility, because not everything abandoned is empty, and not everything forgotten is without voice. So when I think back to my island childhood, full of freedom and wandering and imagined treasures, this is the story that rises above the rest. Not because it began in terror, but because it began in mockery. Not because I went searching for the strange, but because I insulted what I did not understand. The memory stayed with me not as a ghost story told around children huddled by a graveyard wall, but as a warning carried quietly through the years. And somewhere in the corner of my closet, the old blue coat still hangs, as if it remembers too. It all started when I was in either 3rd or 4th grade, at a time when school rumors felt as real as the walls around us. At that age, every whispered story spread fast, especially if it had anything to do with ghosts, curses, or haunted places. We were still young enough to scare each other for fun, but also young enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, some of those stories were true. Most of the time, when something creepy started going around school, we blamed the boys. We were sure they made things up just to frighten us, especially the girls, because they loved seeing us jump at shadows or scream over nothing. So when a scary bathroom rumor started spreading through the halls, most of us rolled our eyes and assumed it was just another trick. I thought that too. But some of us, including me, were about to learn that this story had a little truth hiding inside it. I am sure a lot of people know the old Bloody Mary story. It is one of those school legends that somehow appears in almost every place where children gather long enough to scare one another. Even if the details change from school to school, the fear stays the same. In my elementary school, the story had its own version, and it was more detailed than the usual one. Looking back, I can still remember how seriously the younger students repeated it, lowering their voices as if even saying it too loudly might bring something bad into the room. The rumor said that if you wanted to see Bloody Mary's ghost, you had to go into the girls' bathroom and use the last toilet stall. You had to flush it 3 times. After that, you had to walk to the second to last sink, wash your hands there, and say her name 3 times. If you did everything exactly right, the story said your vision would turn red, and then her ghost would appear to you in the mirror. Some kids even added that she would kill you if she showed up, though no one ever really believed that part. Still, even if we laughed, none of us wanted to test it for ourselves. Our school was the perfect place for that kind of rumor to grow. The building had long hallways that already felt too quiet during certain times of day. The lights were not always bright enough, and some corners looked dim even in daylight. When the halls were empty, they seemed to stretch on forever. The bathrooms were worse. During class time, when no one else was around, the sound of running water, a toilet flushing, or a stall door moving could make you feel like someone unseen was nearby. It did not take much for a place like that to turn an ordinary story into something that felt possible. Even so, most of us tried to act brave. We dismissed the Bloody Mary rumor as just another scary tale made up to keep younger students nervous. We talked about it at lunch, laughed at it during recess, and dared each other to go into the bathroom alone, but very few of us actually wanted to stay there longer than necessary. Deep down, I think we all felt a little uneasy, even if we would never admit it. Then one day something happened that changed the way we looked at that bathroom. It was lunchtime, and the usual noise of the break filled the room around us. Girls were opening their lunch boxes, biting into sandwiches, talking over one another, laughing, and sharing whatever little stories had happened that morning. There was nothing strange about that part of the day. It was routine, ordinary, and safe. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a loud slam, followed by a scream and the sound of someone running. The whole mood changed in an instant. A girl from our class came rushing toward us. She was crying harder than I had ever seen her cry before. Her face had gone completely pale, and her hands were shaking so badly that it looked like her whole body might give out at any moment. She was not the kind of person who cried for attention, and that made it worse. The moment we saw her, everyone around me stopped talking. Lunches were forgotten. People stood up. Chairs scraped. All the energy in the room shifted from normal school chatter to sudden panic. We crowded around her right away, asking what was wrong, trying to calm her down, trying to understand what had happened. But for the first minute or so, she was crying so hard that none of us could make sense of her words. She kept trying to speak, but the sounds came out broken and tangled. She looked truly terrified, not embarrassed, not dramatic, but genuinely frightened. After a while, some of the girls got her to sit down on a bench. Someone handed her water. She pulled out her lunch with shaky hands and drank as if she had run a mile. When she finally managed to calm down enough to speak clearly, everyone fell quiet. Even the girls who normally joked about everything were silent. We all leaned closer to hear her. She said she had been in the bathroom washing her hands. After that, she looked up into the mirror to fix her hair. At first, everything seemed normal, but then her vision started turning red. She said it was like a red haze had covered what she could see. When her sight cleared again, she noticed a woman standing behind her in the mirror. The woman was wearing an elaborate dress, the kind of dress none of us would ever expect to see in real life. Her hands were stretched forward, and the tips of her fingers looked red. Not bright red, not painted, just touched with red enough to stand out. The girl said she turned quickly, wanting to see the woman more clearly, but when she looked behind her, there was no one there. The woman had vanished. Then, as she made her way toward the bathroom exit, the door slammed shut behind her with force. That was what broke her. She ran all the way back to us, crying, and only after she left the bathroom did the strange thing stop. The whole group reacted at once. Some girls gasped. Some began speaking all at the same time. Others wrapped their arms around her and tried to comfort her. No one laughed. No one called her a liar. Whatever we had thought before, seeing her in that state made the story feel different. She had not come in smiling or trying to scare us. She had come in trembling and terrified. By the end of that school day, everyone was talking about what had happened. The story spread fast, faster than the original rumor had. It moved from our class to other classrooms, from whispered lunch talk to excited hallway conversation. Some students believed every word. Others claimed she was just frightened by all the Bloody Mary talk and had imagined the whole thing. I was one of those people. Even after seeing how scared she was, I tried to explain it away. I told myself that she had become too caught up in the rumor. I thought maybe she had stared too long at the red bathroom door, and that was why her vision had looked red afterward. In our school, the bathroom doors were painted in bright colors like red, green, and blue. It seemed possible to me that she had looked at a red surface too long, then glanced at the mirror, and in her nervous state imagined the rest. I clung to that explanation because it felt safer than admitting something strange might really be happening in the school bathroom. At the time, I felt almost proud of my reasoning. I believed I was being practical and smart, unlike the others who were letting an old ghost story control them. I thought fear was making everyone dramatic. I truly believed I had figured it out. But I was wrong. A few days later, I found myself alone in that same elementary school bathroom, doing something as simple and harmless as washing my hands. There was no dare involved. I was not trying to see anything. I was not even really thinking about the rumor at that moment. It was just another ordinary school day, and I had gone into the bathroom because I needed to. The room looked normal enough. The sinks were lined up the way they always were. The mirrors reflected the pale school lighting. There was the usual smell of soap and damp air. Water ran over my hands as I stood there, half distracted, probably thinking about whatever child-sized problem had been filling my head earlier that day. Then I looked up. Behind me, in the mirror, stood a woman. To this day, I can still remember the shock of that moment. She was standing there as clearly as if she had been another person in the room, and yet there had been no sound of anyone entering. She wore an elaborate dress, just like my classmate had described. Her hair was pinned up in a style I had only ever seen in books or in old drawings. There was something old-fashioned about her, something out of place, as though she belonged to another time entirely. She was not blurred. She was not a shape. She was not a trick of light. She was there. I froze immediately. My whole body locked in place. The water kept running over my hands, but I barely felt it anymore. I forgot to move. I forgot to breathe properly. All I could do was stare into the mirror. And she stared back. I do not know how long that moment lasted. It may have only been a few seconds, but fear can make time feel much longer than it really is. In my memory, it stretches out. I remember the stillness more than anything else. Neither of us moved. It was as if the whole bathroom had gone silent around that reflection. Then one of the stall doors slammed. The sound exploded through the room and snapped me out of that frozen state. I jumped in terror and spun around. The woman was gone. There was no one there. No sign of anyone standing behind me. But the slamming did not stop. The stall or cabinet door banged again and again, 2 or 3 times, hard enough to make me panic completely. That was when my body finally started working again. I did not even think. I just ran. I forgot to dry my hands. I left the water running in the sink. I rushed straight out through the bathroom entrance as fast as I could move, desperate to get away from that room. After that day, I never saw the woman again. But that was not the end of the strange things in that bathroom. In some ways, it felt like that experience opened my eyes to everything else that had already been happening there. Once I had seen her, it became impossible to dismiss the odd things around me as easily as before. Afterward, whenever I had to use that bathroom, I was tense from the second I stepped inside. I would wash my hands quickly and try not to look too long into the mirror. Sometimes, while standing there, I would hear a stall door close when I knew I was alone. I would call out, asking if someone was there, and then I would hear footsteps. The sound would move away from me, leading out of the bathroom as if someone had just walked out. But when I looked, no one was there. That happened more than once. Other times, the doors in the bathroom would open and close on their own. Not always violently, but enough to make you stop and listen. Enough to make your stomach tighten. Enough to remind you that strange things kept happening even when no one else seemed to be around. What made it worse was the way the whole atmosphere of the bathroom could change without warning. During the winter, the building's heating system kept most of the school warm. You could walk into the bathroom 1 minute and feel normal indoor heat around you. Then, only a few minutes later, you could go back and find the room strangely cold, so cold it felt unnatural. It was not the kind of chill that comes from standing near a window or stepping into a draft. It was deeper than that. The air itself seemed wrong somehow, and there were times when it felt cold enough that you could almost see your breath. I remember testing it once, trying to prove to myself that there had to be a normal explanation. I reached out and touched the radiator. It was still working. Heat was still coming from it. But somehow that heat did not seem to affect the room the way it should have. The radiator said warmth, but the atmosphere said something else entirely. That made the whole thing even harder to explain. As more incidents happened, the girls in my class became more and more unwilling to use that bathroom. At first, we only complained about it. Then we began making excuses. Eventually, many of us stopped going there altogether. Instead, we started using the bathroom upstairs. It meant climbing an extra flight of stairs, and under normal circumstances we would have hated that. Children are usually quick to complain about any extra effort, especially at school. But in this case, not one of us cared. Walking farther to use a normal bathroom felt like a small price to pay for peace of mind. The upstairs bathroom did not have the same heavy feeling. It did not carry that strange tension the way the downstairs one did. There were no stories attached to it. No slamming doors. No unexplained footsteps. No sudden cold that made the room feel empty and watched at the same time. It was just a bathroom, plain and ordinary, and that was exactly what we wanted. Even after we started using the upstairs one, the downstairs bathroom kept its reputation. New students heard the stories. Older students repeated them. The Bloody Mary rumor stayed alive. But for me it was no longer just a rumor. I had my own reason to fear that place. What frightened me most was not the ghost story itself. It was how normal everything had seemed right before I saw her. That is what stayed with me. There had been no warning. No strange sound first. No cold breeze. No shadow in the corner. One moment I was simply washing my hands, and the next moment there was a woman in the mirror behind me. For a long time, I tried to make sense of it. I wondered if fear from hearing my classmate's story had planted the image in my mind. I wondered if I had imagined it because I was thinking about what had happened to her. But the truth is, I had not gone into the bathroom expecting to see anything. I was not repeating Bloody Mary's name. I was not trying to prove or test the rumor. I was just there. That was what made it so unsettling. It felt uninvited, as though the bathroom held something that did not need to be summoned because it was already there. As children, we often turned serious fear into shared behavior. We whispered, warned one another, and built rules around the things that scared us. That is exactly what happened with that bathroom. No one wanted to be the last one inside alone. No one wanted to stand at the sink too long. No one wanted to look into the mirror unless absolutely necessary. If someone had to go in, she often asked another girl to come too. Even then, the visit would be quick. We would go in, do what we needed to do, wash our hands as fast as possible, and leave. I think what affected us most was the fact that the strange things did not happen only once. If it had only been my classmate's story, maybe people would have eventually laughed it off. If it had only been my own experience, maybe I would have questioned my memory more harshly. But there were too many little things after that. Too many doors moving by themselves. Too many footsteps with no person attached to them. Too many sudden shifts in temperature that none of us could explain. The more it happened, the less willing we were to pretend it was nothing. I still remember the feeling of hearing a stall door close while washing my hands and knowing, deep down, that I was alone. It is a very specific kind of fear. It is not loud at first. It begins as a tiny tightening in your chest, a pause in your breathing, a sudden urge not to turn around too quickly. You begin listening harder. Every small sound matters. Your mind starts trying to find explanations because that feels safer than accepting the alternative. Maybe someone just walked in quietly. Maybe the door moved because of air pressure. Maybe the heating system is acting up. Maybe. But when those explanations fall apart one by one, all that remains is the fear. And then there was that woman. What I saw in the mirror did not look wild or monstrous the way children might imagine Bloody Mary. She was not covered in gore. She was not screaming. She was not rushing toward me. In some ways, that made the sight of her worse. She looked calm. Still. Elegant even. Her dress was elaborate. and her hair was pinned up in a style I only recognized from old pictures and books. She looked as though she had stepped out of another time and into the mirror behind me. The quietness of her presence frightened me far more than any dramatic image could have. Sometimes I wondered who she was supposed to be. Was she the same Bloody Mary everyone talked about? Or had the children simply attached that old legend to something already haunting the school? Perhaps the rumor gave a name to an experience no one could properly explain. Children are good at turning fear into stories because stories help fear feel manageable. If you can name it, chant for it, and build rules around it, then maybe it feels less powerful. But what if the bathroom had its own ghost all along, and Bloody Mary was just the shape our minds gave to it? That thought bothered me even more as I grew older. The woman I saw did not feel like something invented by children. She felt older than our rumor, older than our games, older than our fear. The way she looked, the way she stood, the old-fashioned style of her dress and hair, all of it suggested a person from another period. It made me wonder whether the school had been built on something older, or whether the woman had some connection to the place that none of us knew about. Of course, as children, we never thought that deeply. We just avoided the bathroom and moved on the best we could. But the memory remained, and memories often grow stranger the longer they stay with you. At that age, school bathrooms were such ordinary places. They were supposed to be dull, unpleasant at worst, and easy to forget. Yet that one bathroom became a place loaded with tension. It changed how we moved through our school day. It changed where we went, what we talked about, and how we felt in certain hallways. We began timing bathroom visits, so we would not have to go alone. Some girls waited until they got home rather than use the downstairs bathroom. Others made sure they only used it when a crowd of students was nearby. Fear, once it settles into a place, changes the behavior of everyone who knows about it. Lunch breaks especially became filled with retellings of what had happened. Someone would swear she heard footsteps. Another would claim a door moved when no one was near it. Someone else would say the air felt freezing the whole time she was inside. Every new account added to the weight of the place. Whether each detail was fully true or not hardly mattered. The bathroom had already crossed the line from ordinary to haunted in our minds. Still, out of all those strange things, what stayed with me most was the moment at the sink. I can still picture the running water, the mirror, the school bathroom light, and then the sudden sight of her behind me. There was no build-up, no dramatic warning, just her presence. That is the kind of moment that stays sharp long after other childhood memories start to blur. After some time, the fear became part of school life in a strange way. We adjusted to it, though none of us ever truly accepted it. We simply worked around it. We used the upstairs bathroom and treated the downstairs one like a place to avoid. That was our solution. Children are often practical like that. If something feels wrong and there is another option, you take the other option. We did not need adults to prove anything. We did not need teachers to agree. We only needed our own instincts. And those instincts said clearly that the downstairs bathroom was not a place we wanted to be. Even now, when I think back on elementary school, that bathroom comes to mind faster than classrooms, playground games, or lunch tables. It stands out because it carried a fear that felt real and personal. Many childhood scares fade with time because we eventually learn what caused them. A shadow becomes a coat on a chair. A sound becomes pipes in the wall. A scary face becomes a trick of light. But some things remain unexplained, and because they remain unexplained, they stay alive in memory. I never saw the woman again after that one day. That fact should have comforted me, but it never really did. Instead, it made the sight of her feel even more important, as if I had stumbled into one brief moment of visibility, 1 second where something hidden chose to show itself. After that, only the smaller disturbances continued, the footsteps, the doors, the cold air that did not match the heating. It was almost as if seeing her once was enough. Maybe that is why I still remember it so clearly. A single sighting is easier to doubt, but it is also harder to forget. If I had seen her over and over, perhaps the memory would have worn down around the edges. Instead, it stayed fixed in one perfect scene. A woman in an elaborate dress, her hair pinned up, standing silently behind me in a school bathroom mirror. As an adult, I know how often people dismiss childhood experiences. They say children imagine things, exaggerate, copy one another, or get carried away by rumors. And yes, children do all those things. We did too. We frightened one another, passed stories around, and built legends out of ordinary spaces. But I also know what I saw. I know the fear that came with it. And I know that after my classmates' experience, and then my own, that bathroom never felt normal again. Maybe the Bloody Mary rumor started as a joke. Maybe boys really did help spread it because they knew it would scare us. Maybe children added more details each year to make it creepier. But I do not think the fear survived only because of imagination. I think something in that bathroom kept the story alive. Something about that place made the rumor feel believable, and that is why it held on. What happened there changed the way I listened to ghost stories after that. Before, they were entertainment, something to whisper about for fun. Afterward, they felt different. I learned that the scariest experiences are not always dramatic. Sometimes they happen in ordinary places, in broad daylight, during the simplest moments. Sometimes they happen while washing your hands at a school sink. And that, to me, is what makes the whole thing stay so unsettling. It was not a haunted house or a dark forest, or an abandoned building at midnight. It was my elementary school bathroom, a place I should have been able to enter without a second thought. Instead, it became the place where I learned that rumors can hold a small piece of truth, and that sometimes what people laugh at in daylight becomes impossible to explain once you are standing alone in front of a mirror. After that, the girls in my class and I kept using the upstairs bathroom whenever we could. We climbed the extra stairs without complaining, and no one ever tried to convince the others to go back downstairs if it was not necessary. We had made our choice. Better a normal bathroom than one where doors slammed on their own, footsteps came and went with no one there, the air turned cold for no reason, and a woman in an old-fashioned dress could appear behind you in the mirror. That school bathroom may have started as the setting for a childish rumor, but for me it became something else entirely. It became one of those memories that never really leaves, the kind that returns unexpectedly years later, still carrying the same chill it did the first time. And even now, when I hear people mention Bloody Mary as just another silly school legend, I cannot fully laugh it off. Because I remember what I saw. One of the strangest things about growing up was realizing that some experiences stay with you no matter how many years pass. You can try to explain them, laugh them off, or push them into the back of your mind, but they remain there, waiting. Sometimes they return in flashes. A face at a window. A sound in the dark. A shape at the foot of the bed. A figure standing where no one should be standing. These things settle into memory differently than ordinary events. They do not fade the same way. They stay sharp, almost untouched, because part of your mind never stops trying to understand them. I have seen things for as long as I can remember, and that is what makes it so difficult to talk about. If it had happened only once, maybe I would have found some way to dismiss it. If it had happened twice, I might have called it stress, dreams, or imagination. But it did not happen once or twice. It happened again and again, in different places, at different times, and in ways that were too vivid for me to ignore. What frightened me most was not only what I saw, but how real everything felt in the moment. These were not vague shadows or uncertain shapes caught from the corner of my eye. These were clear images. Faces. Animals. People. Things that seemed present, solid, and impossible all at the same time. Even now, I know how people react when you tell them such things. They assume you are exaggerating, confused, tired, or trying to get attention. Some will smile politely while already deciding they do not believe a word. Others will act kind but distant, as though they are humoring you. And then there are those closest to you, the ones you most want to believe you, who say nothing at all or try to explain everything away because the truth is too strange for them to accept. That part can hurt almost as much as the fear itself. It is one thing to see something you cannot explain. It is another thing entirely to carry that experience alone because no one else saw it, or because they did and refused to admit it, or because what you saw vanished before anyone else could look. I was not a reckless person who spent my days chasing ghost stories. I was not someone trying to summon strange things or invite them into my life. Most of these moments happened when I was doing something ordinary. Washing my face. Lying in bed. Trying to sleep. Getting up for water. That is one of the reasons the experiences unsettled me so deeply. There was no warning. No ritual. No preparation. Strange things simply appeared in the middle of regular life, turning normal moments into memories I have never forgotten. One evening, when I was around 10 or 11, I was standing at the sink washing my face. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. The light outside had started to dim just enough to make everything feel quieter, though it was not fully dark yet. It was one of those in-between times of day when the house seems to settle into itself. I remember splashing water onto my face, feeling the coolness of it, and then reaching for a towel to dry off. Nothing felt unusual in that moment. It was an ordinary part of the evening, something so simple I should never have remembered it at all. Then I heard a tapping at the window. At first, I did not react right away. A small sound at a window can be many things. A branch, perhaps. A loose movement from outside. Maybe even a bird. Still drying my face, I turned toward the sound without much thought. What I saw made my whole body go cold. Pressed right against the glass was a white face, with hands beside it. The face looked ghastly, pale in a way that did not seem natural, and so close to the window that there was no room for doubt. Something had been there, looking in at me. The image was so sudden and so wrong that for a second I could not process it. I just stood there staring, towel in my hand, unable to move. The thing that made it even worse was the fact that we were on the 4th floor. There was no balcony outside that window. There was no ledge anyone could stand on, no easy way for a person to be there. The sight of that face was frightening enough, but the impossibility of it made the fear even sharper. There was simply no logical reason for anyone or anything to be pressed against that glass. Then the face vanished. It did not move away in a normal way. It was there, and then it was gone. That sudden disappearance shocked me out of my frozen state. Even though I was frightened, a part of me needed to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe someone had climbed up somehow. Maybe I was missing something obvious. So, despite the fear rising in me, I went to the window and opened it. I leaned out as far as I dared and looked around. The air outside felt cold on my face. The building wall stood silent and plain, just as it always did. There was nowhere for anyone to stand. Nowhere for a face and 2 hands to have appeared the way I had just seen them. I looked one way, then the other, trying to spot anything at all. When I turned my head to the right, I caught sight of something black disappearing around the corner of the building. It moved fast, just enough for me to know I had seen it, and not enough for me to understand what it was. That was all it took. My fear, which had already been building, became full panic. I pulled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard it felt painful. By then I was deeply shaken. The ordinary safety of my room was gone. Everything felt different. The walls, the window, the evening air, all of it suddenly seemed uncertain. That night I did everything I could think of to make myself feel safe again. I rolled the shutters all the way down until not a single gap remained. I locked every door in the house that I could check. I kept the lights on. I did not trust the dark. I did not trust the window. I did not trust what I had seen, but I trusted the fear it had left behind. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every small sound made me tense. Every creak of the house seemed loaded with meaning. Once you have seen something impossible at your window, the whole night changes around you. That was only one incident. Another time, I was in bed sleeping, and I had a nightmare that felt far too real. In the dream, owls were attacking my window. I could see them pressing their beaks against the glass over and over, hard enough to make me feel the force of it even in sleep. The detail of that dream has always stayed with me because I have always loved animals. I loved them then too. Owls especially should not have been terrifying to me. They are beautiful creatures, mysterious perhaps, but not something I would normally fear. Yet in that dream, I was terrified beyond words. The owls were white. I remember that clearly. Their whiteness made the whole dream feel even stranger. They did not seem like ordinary birds that had accidentally flown too close to a window. They seemed determined, focused, almost unnatural. In the dream, they kept pressing against the glass until finally it broke. The sound of shattering glass was sharp and violent. Pieces of it fell onto me. Then the owls came through, and they started pecking at me. The pain felt real. That is what made the dream so awful. It did not feel distant or dreamlike. It hurt. The fear and the pain were strong enough that I bolted upright into a sitting position. I opened my eyes knowing I had been dreaming, relieved for only a split second to be awake. Then I saw it. Sitting on my feet was a white owl. It was not at the window. It was not flying through the room. It was there on my feet, calmly present, as if it belonged there. I can still remember the way shock and terror hit me at once. I screamed louder than I had ever screamed in my life. It was not a cry of confusion. It was a full, desperate scream of fear. My mother came running at once. When she rushed in, I expected her to see what I was seeing. I expected her to stop, scream, or react somehow. But she did not. She acted as if there was nothing there at all. She moved toward the bed, trying to calm me down, and then she sat directly where the owl was. The owl passed right through her. That was one of the most impossible things I have ever witnessed. If I had only seen the owl sitting there, maybe someone could say I was still half dreaming. But I watched my mother sit through it as if it were made of air, and in that same moment I knew I was seeing something she could not see. The next time I blinked, the owl was gone. That experience left me shaken for a long time. It was not just the fear of the dream or the shock of waking to find the owl there. It was the helplessness of knowing that even when someone came to help me, they were walking into a reality different from the one I was seeing. My mother was trying to comfort me, but I could not even explain what had just happened in a way that made sense. How do you tell someone you woke from a nightmare only to find part of it waiting for you in the room? How do you explain that they passed through it without noticing? There was another night when I was lying awake in bed, unable to fall asleep. I remember staring up at the ceiling, the way children do when sleep refuses to come. Everything around me was quiet. The room was dim. My bed was a wooden bunk bed, though not the usual kind with another bed beneath it. Instead, it had closets underneath, so the structure was heavy and solid. I was used to its sounds, the little noises it would make as a house cools at night. Because I knew those sounds well, anything different stood out to me immediately. As I stared upward, I thought I saw movement on the ceiling. I sat up at once, alert, looking harder. But when I focused, I saw nothing. No shadow. No insect. No shape moving across the plaster. After a while, when nothing more happened, I tried to relax. I told myself I must have imagined it. So I lay back down. Then I heard a rasping sound against the wood. It was close enough that I knew it was coming from my bed or the furniture attached to it. It was a dragging, scraping sound, the kind that instantly makes you picture claws or scales moving over a rough surface. My heart jumped. I leaned over the side of the bed to look. What I saw was a large snake. It was beige with orange spots, and it looked horribly real. It was not a vague shape. It was not a shadow that could be mistaken for something else. It was a snake, big enough to fill me with instant panic, and it was climbing toward me. I watched it slither onto my bed with horrifying ease. Before I could even fully react, it coiled itself around my neck and arms. Then it began to constrict. The sensation of that moment has never left me. The panic was immediate, but so was the feeling of pressure, of being trapped, of something powerful tightening around me. I screamed with everything I had. I was only 10 or 11, and my fear was absolute. I was certain in that moment that I was in real danger. Then, in a blink, the snake was gone. Just like that. No movement away. No slithering off the bed. No trace. It was simply there, and then not there. The sudden disappearance did not make the experience easier. In some ways, it made it worse. Something that can vanish so completely leaves you with nothing to hold on to except your own memory of terror. You would think that would have been enough for one night, but it was not. Later that same night, the snake appeared again. This time it was not alone. It came with another snake, a green python. I remember the color because it stood out so clearly. The two snakes were distinct, not just a repeated flash of the same thing. The next day, still disturbed by what I had seen, I looked them up and found that both matched real species of snakes. That detail stayed with me because it suggested my mind had not simply made up a random creature out of fear. What I saw had specific features, real enough to identify afterward. That incident left me confused in a different way than the owl had. With the owl, there had been a nightmare first, a bridge between dream and waking. With the snakes, I was already awake. I had been staring at the ceiling. I had heard the rasping sound. I had leaned over to look. Everything had happened in the kind of awareness people usually trust completely. Yet once again, what I saw did not stay long enough for anyone else to witness it. That is how many of these experiences went. They arrived suddenly, vividly, and then vanished. They always left behind fear, doubt, and the awful question that followed me for years: why was this happening to me? It was not limited to animals or faces at windows. I also saw people. One summer, I was staying in our summer house. My parents' room was next to mine. I remember that night clearly because I had been trying to sleep and failing, just lying there with my thoughts, half irritated, half restless. Eventually I got up to get a glass of water, hoping that might help me settle down. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet late at night, when everyone else is asleep and every movement feels louder than it should. I drank the water and came back to my room. When I sat down again, I saw him. There was a man standing near my parents' bed. He was very tall and strongly built, though a bit chubby. He had red hair, spiky in style, and he wore a white starched shirt with a blue tie, a blue suit jacket, and blue trousers. The details were oddly precise, and that is one reason I still remember him so well. He did not look like a blur or a shadow. He looked like a full person standing there with his hands stretched out toward my parents' bed. The sight of him filled me with dread at once. My parents were asleep only a room away, vulnerable, unaware that anyone was near them. I yelled for them immediately. My voice woke them both at once. In that moment, the man looked up at me. He did not seem frightened or guilty. Instead, he shrugged, as if what he was doing was none of my concern, and then he disappeared. Just like that. Gone. I was left staring into empty space, shaking, while my parents woke up trying to understand why I had screamed. I was deeply disturbed. There was something so strange about his reaction, that little shrug, almost casual, almost dismissive. It made the encounter feel even more real somehow, because it was such a specific gesture. It was not dramatic or monstrous. It was human. That made it more unsettling than if he had looked like some traditional ghost from a storybook. Moments like that are hard to explain because the fear does not end when the figure disappears. The fear stays in the room after. It settles in your body. It makes you question your own mind while also making you cling to what you know you saw. The problem is that once the thing is gone, you are left only with your own word, and your own word does not always feel strong enough when others are looking at you with doubt. That has been one of the hardest parts of all of this. The experiences themselves were terrifying, yes, but almost equally painful was the disbelief that followed. My family did not truly believe me. They may have listened. They may have comforted me in the moment because I was upset. But listening is not the same as believing. Comfort is not the same as trust. I could see it in their faces. To them, these were bad dreams, nerves, imagination, or the strange way children process fear. But I know what I saw. That is what I have held on to all this time. I am not crazy. I am not inventing stories for attention. I am not someone who cannot tell the difference between a dream and waking life. I am a sane person who has had experiences that did not fit into the normal world around me. That is all. I do not claim to understand them. I do not claim to know why they happened. I only know they did. What made these incidents even harder was how often they seemed to happen when I was young and vulnerable, often in bed or alone, in those spaces where the mind is expected to be tired and easy to dismiss. If I had seen something in broad daylight in the middle of a crowded room, perhaps others would have believed me more readily. But that is not how these things worked. They happened in private moments, at the edges of sleep, in the hush of evening, in the silence of late night. The places where fear already has room to grow. Still, I know the difference between imagination and a presence that feels outside of you. I know the difference between a dream fading and an image that remains fixed in your mind years later because it was too detailed, too shocking, too immediate to be dismissed. The white face at the fourth floor window was not imagination. The owl sitting on my feet after the nightmare was not just a dream continuing. The snake wrapping around my neck and arms was not a simple half-sleep illusion. The man in the blue suit standing by my parents' bed was not a passing shadow. These things felt entirely present when they happened. There is also the pattern to consider. One strange event can be explained away. Two might be called coincidence. But repeated visions of people, animals, and impossible figures over time begin to form a life of their own inside your memory. They make you wary. They make you question spaces other people move through without thinking. They make ordinary routines feel uncertain. Washing your face at a sink is no longer just washing your face. Looking at your window at dusk is no longer harmless. Waking from a nightmare does not always bring relief if you fear part of it may still be in the room waiting for you. As a child, these things affected me deeply. They made nights harder. They made sleep feel unsafe. They made me question whether closing my eyes was inviting something in. I learned to leave lights on. I learned to check windows and doors more than once. I learned the strange loneliness of seeing something no one else could confirm. And at the same time, I learned to keep parts of it to myself, because saying everything aloud only invited disbelief. That kind of disbelief changes a person. It teaches you to examine your own memory too harshly, to doubt yourself before anyone else can. It teaches you to rehearse what you saw again and again, searching for mistakes, searching for anything that would make it ordinary. Was I more tired than I thought? Did I mishear the sound? Did a dream linger into waking? Was there some normal shape my mind transformed? Those questions become habits. But no matter how many times I turn them over, the experiences remained stubbornly themselves. The face at the window remained impossible because of the fourth floor height and the lack of any balcony. The owl remained impossible because I watched my mother pass right through it. The snakes remained impossible because of their detail and the physical feeling of constriction. The man remained impossible because of his clear appearance, his clothing, his posture, and that strange, human shrug before disappearing. Each memory held details that made simple dismissal difficult. I do not pretend to have answers. I cannot tell you whether these were spirits, visions, something attached to places, or something attached to me. I do not know whether they came from outside me or from some corner of the mind most people never have to face so directly. I only know that they happened all the time, and that when they did, they were real enough to fill me with terror. That phrase, "this happens all the time," may sound dramatic, but that is the truest way to put it. I see things. Not constantly every hour of every day, but often enough that it changed how I lived. Often enough that I stopped thinking of any single event as a complete surprise. There was always a part of me waiting, wondering when the next impossible thing would appear. That kind of expectation is exhausting. It turns ordinary evenings into tense ones. It turns restlessness into dread. It makes you fear what the next glance into a dark corner might reveal. I think some people assume that if strange experiences happen often enough, you must get used to them. In one sense, maybe you do. You learn the pattern of fear. You learn how quickly panic can rise. You learn that sometimes the image will vanish before anyone else arrives. But you never really get used to the shock itself. You never truly become calm when a white face appears at a window where no one could possibly stand, or when a bird from your nightmare is sitting on your feet in waking life, or when a snake is coiling around your neck, or when a suited man is reaching toward your sleeping parents. Some things refuse to become normal. And yet life continues around them. That is another strange part of it. After each incident, the house remained the same house. The room stayed the same room. Morning came. People ate breakfast. Windows were opened. Beds were made. Daily life moved forward, even while inside me the fear remained alive. The world did not stop to acknowledge what had happened. That made the experiences feel even more isolated. It was as if two realities existed side by side, the normal one everyone else walked through, and the one I occasionally slipped into without warning. Sometimes I wonder whether children are more open to such things, or whether they simply lack the defenses adults build over time. Children still look directly. They still trust what they see before doubt teaches them not to. Maybe that is why so many of my experiences happened when I was young. Or maybe they happened then because fear is stronger in youth, and whatever these things were, they moved best through fear. I cannot say. But I know that those years left their mark on me. Even now, I can return to each moment with uncomfortable clarity. I can see the pale face at the glass. I can feel the cold rush through me as I realize no one could possibly be outside that window. I can hear the shattered violence of the owl nightmare, and feel the scream building when I wake to find one sitting on my feet. I can hear the scrape on the wooden bed and see the beige snake with orange spots climbing toward me. I can feel the terrible pressure of it coiling around my neck and arms. I can see the second green python later that same night. I can picture the man in the blue suit, red hair sharp against the darkness, hands stretched toward my parents' bed before he looks up and shrugs. These are not vague childhood memories softened by time. They are sharp, specific, and unwelcome. That is one reason I cannot simply dismiss them. False memories usually blur. Fearful inventions usually lose detail. But these moments stayed. So when I say I am sane, I mean it with all the strength I have. I know how this sounds. I know how easy it is for people to hear such things and decide that the storyteller must be unstable. But I am not. I am very sane. I have simply lived with experiences I cannot explain. My family may not believe me. Other people may not believe me. That is their choice. But I know what I saw. And perhaps that is the hardest truth of all. Sometimes there is no explanation that satisfies everyone. Sometimes all you have is your own memory, your own fear, and the certainty that something impossible stepped into your world for a moment, and then slipped away before anyone else could catch it. You go on living. You grow older. You become more careful about who you tell. But the experiences remain, and every so often they rise again, just as vivid as the day they happened. If someone asked me what frightened me most, I do not think I would say it was the face, the owl, the snakes, or even the man. I think what frightened me most was the feeling that the boundary between ordinary life and something else was thinner around me than it was around other people. That was the true terror. Not just seeing one impossible thing, but realizing it might happen again at any time, in any room, during any ordinary moment. That is why these memories stayed. That is why I still speak about them with certainty. And that is why, even now, I cannot pretend they were nothing. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. People often call it foolishness when a girl marries too young. They shake their heads, lower their voices, and talk about it as if youth itself is a sickness that makes people blind. Maybe they are right in some cases. Maybe they are not. I have never liked the word foolishness for what happened in my life. To me, it always felt more like the deep longing of a young heart, the kind of longing that wants love to be enough, that wants closeness to turn into certainty, and that wants marriage to answer questions a person is still too young to understand. At 19, I believed that love meant finding the missing part of yourself in another person. I believed that if you cared enough, forgave enough, and stayed long enough, everything would eventually fall into place. With those hopes quietly burning inside me, I married a good friend of mine and stepped into a life I thought would finally make sense. It did not last. I do not say that lightly or with bitterness anymore. Time softens certain truths, though it does not erase them. Back then, however, the failure of that marriage felt heavy and humiliating. It felt like standing in the middle of a dream that was breaking apart, while everyone watched. I remember the shame of admitting, even to myself, that I had made a mistake. Not because the marriage had only ended quickly, but because I had entered it with such confidence. I had thought my heart knew what it was doing. I had thought friendship would naturally grow into the kind of partnership that survives the rougher seasons of life. Instead, I found myself standing face to face with the truth that affection alone is not enough to carry two people forward if they are not looking toward the same future. I still remember the day I finally understood that. It came in the words of my grandfather, spoken in that calm, steady way older people sometimes have, as if they are not only answering your pain, but placing it into a shape you can carry. When I admitted defeat for the first time, he looked at me and said, "Love is not to simply look into each other's eyes, but when two sets of eyes look in the same direction in life." The moment he said it, something inside me settled. It was as though 100 scattered thoughts suddenly formed a clear picture. I understood, perhaps for the first time, that love was not meant to survive on feeling alone. It had to be joined by purpose, by shared direction, by the quiet agreement of what life together was meant to be. That realization gave me strength. I was young, but not so young that I could not see what was happening anymore. I began gathering my courage and with it, my few belongings. I had decided I would leave. I can still remember the strange mixture of fear and relief that came over me when I finally said the words aloud, "I'm moving out." Those words were not spoken dramatically. They were not shouted through anger. They came with the trembling seriousness of someone who has reached the edge of what she can pretend. Saying them made everything feel more real. It also made me feel, for the first time in a long while, that perhaps I could still save myself from a life that was not meant for me. But life, as it often does, changed direction before I could take the step I had planned. That same day, before anything could move forward, we learned that my father-in-law was dying of lung cancer. The news did not arrive like a storm. It came with the cruel heaviness of final truth, the kind of truth that leaves a room silent after it is spoken. Everything I had been thinking about myself, my marriage, my escape, my hurt, all of it suddenly fell backward. There are moments in life when your own pain must wait because something larger has entered the room. This was one of those moments. My plans did not disappear, but they were placed aside. I understood at once that whatever I felt, whatever I had decided, there was now something more urgent than my own unhappiness. A dying man stood before us, and that changed everything. What made it harder to explain to others was the fact that I loved him deeply. Many people did not. At least, not in the easy, open way love is usually imagined. His family feared him more than they understood him. They had lived for years with his temper, with the anger that seemed to flare out of nowhere, with the sharpness of his words and the violence of his outbursts. To many of them he was difficult, bitter, and exhausting. He made people walk carefully. He made them keep their distance. Over time, that distance had hardened into resentment, and resentment into quiet dislike. In their eyes he was a man defined by his rage. But that is not how I saw him. To me, he was like an angry little boy trapped inside a grown man's body, always reaching badly for something he did not know how to ask for. Attention, tenderness, understanding, control, perhaps all of it at once. I do not mean to excuse the pain he caused. He did cross the line at times, and I saw that plainly. I saw the damage his anger left behind. I saw how others recoiled from him, and I knew they had reasons. Yet I also watched what happened after the shouting ended, after the fury had spent itself. He would retreat inward. He would sit in silence. And in those moments, I could see the self-hatred on him almost as clearly as I had seen the anger before it. It was there in the heaviness of his face, in the way he avoided looking at others, in the shame that followed each storm. He was not a man at peace with himself. He was a man at war inside, and everyone around him ended up wounded by that battle. Perhaps because I could see that, he softened toward me in ways he did not with others. He loved me too, though even that kind of love seemed strange and awkward on him. I think he loved me because I saw through the noise he made and still chose kindness. I forgave him when he lost control. I spoke to him when others withdrew. I did not pretend he was gentle, but I did try to understand the part of him that had never learned how to be loved properly. Sometimes I would hug him or kiss him on the cheek in simple affection, and every single time his whole face would turn red. It was almost startling to watch. A man who could fill a room with fury would blush like a child at the smallest tenderness. That blush told me more about his life than many stories could have. It showed how unfamiliar he was with touch given without fear. It showed how little gentleness he knew how to receive. When his illness became serious, I stayed close to him. His moods shifted even more in those final days, as though the approaching end had made every emotion sharper. One day he would be calm, almost peaceful, speaking as if there might still be time, as if the doctors could be wrong, as if he could still hold on to the familiar rhythm of life. On another day he would be angry and bitter, lashing out at the unfairness of what was happening to him, at his own body, at the people near him, at fate, at God, at anything that could hold the weight of his fear. At times he was hopeful. At times he was broken. At times he seemed like both within the same hour. I stayed with him through all of it. I listened when he wanted to talk. I encouraged him when he wanted to hope. I let him rage when he needed to empty himself of frustration. And sometimes, when all the performance of strength had drained out of him, I cried with him. Those were the moments I remember most clearly now. Not the moments of anger, but the softer ones that came after. The times when the illness stripped him down to what was most human in him: fear, grief, exhaustion, and the longing not to be left alone in it. Illness has a way of reducing life to its most painful basics. It took from him one thing after another. Eating became difficult. Breathing became harder. His body, once so loud with anger and force, slowly turned into a place of struggle and confinement. There is something terribly cruel about lung cancer. It robs a person of breath, and breath is so basic, so constant, that we rarely think of it until it becomes difficult. Watching someone fight for each breath is its own kind of heartbreak. You stand there feeling useless, knowing love cannot breathe for them, kindness cannot heal them, and words cannot push death away when it has already taken hold. Eventually, the end came. It came as an easing of pain for him, and as relief mixed with sorrow for everyone left behind. That may sound harsh to those who have never watched someone suffer at length, but it is true. Death was terrible, yes, but his suffering had become terrible too. By the time it ended, grief was wrapped together with the quiet knowledge that he no longer had to struggle. The house changed afterward. His absence settled into every room. Even silence felt different. A difficult person leaves behind a difficult kind of emptiness. You do not only miss the good in them. You miss the noise, the habits, the tension, the presence, the way they shaped the atmosphere of a place simply by being in it. He had been hard to live with, but he had also been deeply alive, and when such a person is gone, the emptiness they leave behind is larger than expected. A few weeks passed after the funeral. Life had started doing what it always does after death. It was moving, though awkwardly, back toward routine. People returned to tasks, meals, responsibilities, little conversations. Grief did not disappear, but it became quieter in the daylight. Yet underneath that quietness, something unresolved remained in me. I had cried for him more than some members of his own family had. I had stood beside him in his final days. I had held on to tenderness toward him even when he made it hard. Perhaps because of that. Perhaps because death does not always finish the bonds between people as cleanly as we imagine, he remained close in my thoughts. Then one night I woke from a disturbing dream. The feeling of it stayed with me instantly. It was not one of those dreams that fade the moment your eyes open. This one clung to me. His voice remained in my ears with such force that even after I sat up, fully awake, I could still hear it as if he had just spoken beside me. "Please, I'm so hungry. Bring me something to eat." Those words would not leave me. They carried desperation, but not anger. Need, but not violence. He sounded weak. He sounded pleading. It was his voice, and I knew it. I sat there in the dimness of early morning, unsettled by the dream in a way I could not explain. Some dreams feel like nonsense, fragments of a tired mind. This did not feel like nonsense. It felt like a request. I did what came naturally to me in my confusion. I called my mother-in-law. I hoped for guidance, perhaps comfort, perhaps some traditional explanation I had never heard before. Instead, her first response was cold enough to stop me. "Why bother? He's dead." I remember the sting of those words. They were practical, blunt, perhaps even logical in one sense, but they did not answer what I felt. I persisted. I told her the dream had disturbed me. I told her I could not ignore his voice. Maybe she heard something in my tone, because after a little resistance she changed. Her answer shifted from dismissal to something shaped by custom. "Customs dictate," she said, and though she did not seem emotionally invested in it, she gave me enough direction to act. 10 minutes later, I was on my way to the cemetery. It was still early, half an hour before sunrise, and the frost of morning bit through everything. The world at that hour felt suspended, either fully night nor fully day, the kind of hour when the living world still seems to belong partly to silence. My breath came out in pale clouds. My hands were cold despite everything. I carried with me a small bowl of wheat and the weight of uncertainty. I had only been to his grave once since the funeral, and even then my attention had not been on the exact path. I did not know whether I would find it again in the half-dark, beneath snow, in a cemetery that already felt difficult enough in full daylight. As I walked, doubt came and went. What was I doing? Was I responding to grief? To guilt? To superstition? To a dream too vivid for comfort? I did not have answers. I only knew I could not stay in bed and do nothing after hearing his voice like that. Something in me demanded action. Whether it was faith, love, fear, or simply the wish not to fail him even after death, I cannot say. Perhaps it was all of those things together. When I entered through the front gate of the cemetery, I stopped. Before me lay the most beautiful landscape, silent under a thick blanket of snow. The world was white and still, but not empty. That is what struck me most in that moment. The cemetery did not feel abandoned or cold in the cruel sense. It felt hushed. Waiting. The snow had softened every harsh edge, and the early light had not yet fully broken the delicate half-dark over everything. There was beauty there, the kind of beauty that makes you lower your voice without being told. For a moment all my anxiety paused, and I simply looked. The place did not seem distant from the living. It seemed patient, as if holding memory carefully until the living were ready to return. Then uncertainty came back. His grave had been near the gate, I was almost sure of that. But near where exactly? The snow had changed the ground into one quiet surface. I looked around with growing worry, not knowing which direction to choose. I feared wandering too long. I feared failing in the very thing I had come to do. I stood there trying to remember details that would not come clearly enough. And then I saw it. At first it was only the faintest glimpse, like a weak light hidden beneath the snow. I almost thought I had imagined it. But when I looked again, there it was, a delicate glow where no glow should have been. Not bright, not dramatic, just a small steady light, as if the snow itself had begun to breathe softly from within. I approached slowly. My steps felt hesitant, almost reverent. The closer I came, the more certain I became that the light was real. And then I found myself standing directly in front of his headstone. I had not searched row after row. I had not walked the whole cemetery. The light had led me. I bent down, following the direction of the glow, and what I saw has remained one of the most quietly beautiful things I have ever witnessed. A candle had burned below the surface of the snow. In doing so, it had formed a tiny tunnel around itself, a delicate hollow that protected the flame from the soft wind. There it was, still alive, still burning, tucked beneath the whiteness as if the earth itself had sheltered it. I cannot fully explain what I felt in that moment. Wonder, certainly. Sadness, too. But also a strange peace. The world seemed at once more mysterious and more tender than I had realized. I had come to the cemetery because of a dream about hunger, expecting perhaps only duty, perhaps discomfort, perhaps an act of custom to quiet my heart. Instead, I found that hidden flame waiting beneath the snow, guiding me to the grave I feared I would not find. It did not feel frightening. It felt like an answer in a language beyond logic. I placed a small bowl of wheat beside his grave. My hands moved carefully, almost slowly, as though I was afraid to break the stillness of the place. Then I lit a new candle. The flame caught and steadied itself, adding its warmth to the one already there. I whispered a prayer, quiet and simple. I do not remember every word now, only the feeling of speaking them into the cold air and meaning them fully. In that moment I was no longer thinking about whether others would understand, whether customs were superstition, whether dreams carry truth, or whether grief was merely shaping signs out of ordinary things. None of that mattered there. What mattered was that I had come. What mattered was the act of remembrance. What mattered was that love, whatever shape it takes, sometimes asks us to continue caring even when care can no longer be returned in the familiar ways. I stood there for a while after that. The snow, the candlelight, the headstone, the prayer, all of it held me in a silence unlike any I had known before. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of presence. I remember thinking then how strangely beautiful the world is. Strange because it contains suffering and tenderness side by side. Strange because the same life that gives us anger also allows forgiveness. Strange because a man feared for his temper could be mourned with such softness. Strange because death, which seems final, can still leave us feeling called to one last act of care. In the time since then, I have often thought back to that season of my life, and especially to him. People are rarely only one thing, though families often reduce them to the part that hurt most. He was not just his bad temper. He was not just his violence, his bitterness, his ability to wound those nearest him. He was also the man who blushed when hugged, the man who did not know how to receive gentleness, the man whose anger hid deep need, the man who suffered terribly before dying, the man whose voice came to me in a dream saying he was hungry. None of those truths cancel the others. They simply exist together, and perhaps that is what makes loving difficult people such a complicated sorrow. You do not grieve a simple person. You grieve a whole person, with all their harm and all their hidden tenderness tangled together. I also think of what that morning taught me about duty and love. I had been ready to leave my marriage. In my heart I had already crossed that line. Yet when illness entered the house, my own plans had to wait. At the time I may have thought I was simply postponing an unavoidable decision out of obligation. But looking back now, I see that something deeper was happening. Life was teaching me that love is not always located where we first expect it to be. My marriage may have been failing, but in the middle of that failure, I was still being asked to love truly somewhere else. Not in romance. Not in the idealized hope of youth. But in patience, compassion, and presence beside a dying man. Perhaps that too was part of what my grandfather meant, though I did not yet know how fully. For love is not only what draws us toward joy. Sometimes it is what keeps us beside suffering. Sometimes it is what makes us set down our own hurt long enough to witness another's pain. Sometimes it asks nothing glamorous of us at all, only that we stay, listen, and do not harden ourselves even when others have already done so. When I think of him now, I do not think first of his temper or the fear he caused. I think of his face turning red when I kissed his cheek. I think of the helplessness in him when disease took over. I think of how he shifted between hope and despair in those final days. And I think of that candle under the snow, burning quietly in a tunnel of its own making, as though even in death some small fragile thing had been preserved against the cold. Maybe someone else had placed that candle there. Maybe it had burned longer than expected by pure chance. Maybe the light I saw was only timing and coincidence. I do not deny those possibilities. The world is full of explanations. But explanation is not always the deepest truth of an experience. What remains with me is not the need to prove anything. What remains is the feeling of having been led when I did not know the way. The feeling of a hidden flame guiding me through snow to a grave I feared I would not find. The feeling that the world, even in grief, can still reveal mercy in small, quiet forms. There are memories that grow dull with time. This one has not. I still see the cemetery in early frost, the sky not yet fully awake, the silence spread gently over everything. I still feel the uncertainty in my chest as I entered through the gate. I still remember the sudden pause of wonder when I saw how beautiful the snow-covered landscape was. I still remember the faint light beneath the snow, the slow steps toward it, the breath held in my chest, and then the sight of that candle sheltered in a tiny tunnel, alive despite the cold. It remains with me as one of the softest mysteries I have ever known. And perhaps that is what stays with me most from the whole story. Not the broken marriage, though that mattered deeply then. Not even the illness, though it marked us all. What stays is the strange meeting point between sorrow and beauty. A dream of hunger. A walk before sunrise. Snow covering the resting place of the dead. A hidden candle beneath the surface. A bowl of wheat placed beside a grave. A prayer whispered into the frost. The sense that love, even imperfect love, can reach beyond anger, beyond death, beyond the damage people leave behind, and still perform one final kindness. When I left the cemetery that morning, I did not feel frightened. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after tears have finished, after duty has been carried out, after a restless feeling has been answered. I do not know whether he was truly hungry in any way the living can understand, or whether my dream was simply the language grief used to wake me. I only know that I went, and that I found what I found, and that the world seemed, for one brief frozen morning, touched by something far gentler than sorrow. Even now, whenever life seems too harsh, too dry, too easy to reduce into plain logic, I remember that morning. I remember how the snow looked, how the candle burned, how the grave found me instead of the other way around. And I remember standing there, whispering a prayer beside a small bowl of wheat, thinking with complete sincerity how strangely beautiful the world is. When my second husband and I got married 3 years ago, we both felt that life was asking something new from us. We had already spent a long time teaching, and while we still cared about that work, we wanted to try something different as well. We were not ready to leave teaching completely, so our plan was to balance both worlds. We would teach in the mornings, and at night we would run a bar and restaurant of our own. It sounded exhausting when we explained it to other people, and maybe it was, but at the time it felt exciting. It felt like the kind of challenge that might bring new life into our routine. We were still full of energy, still hopeful, and still willing to believe that hard work and love for a place could turn into something beautiful. The chance came through an acquaintance of ours who was tired and worn down after spending 10 years running the business. He wanted, as he put it, to take it easy for a while. That was how the place came into our hands. We bought the business from him, but not the land and not the building itself. Those still belonged to the same family who had owned the place for generations. Even so, the moment I first stepped into it with the thought that it might become ours to care for, I felt something strong and immediate. I fell in love with it at once. It was not just a business to me. It was not one of those empty places that can be decorated, opened, and made profitable without ever really touching the heart. This place had a long history. The building itself had stood there for 150 years. Before it ever became a restaurant or bar, it had been the home of a Turkish family that had lived on the island for more than 200 years. Later, the first owner's son turned it into the first Turkish restaurant in town, introducing Eastern dishes to the Greek people living there. That alone made the place feel special, as if it carried more than walls and rooms. It carried memory. It carried voices from another time, habits and meals and footsteps long gone, but not entirely erased. Over the years the restaurant changed hands. That was natural. Time always moves things from one life into another. The first owner grew too old to continue running it, and others came after him. Then, after all those years, my husband and I entered the story. We became the next people to take care of what had already belonged to so many lives before ours. I do not know how to explain why that mattered to me so deeply, but it did. I never felt as though we were stepping into something empty. I felt as though we were being allowed in. The house itself remained much as it had always been. It was built of stone, in a C shape, sturdy and old, with the kind of presence only old buildings have. In the front there was a busy road, full of movement and passing life, and at the back there was a large yard, around 600 square meters, where everything seemed to grow with almost joyful force. That yard became one of the parts one loved most. It was full of life in every direction. There was a 150-year-old vine, trees of different kinds, and so many plants and flowers that the whole place seemed to breathe on its own. It was not a neat, lifeless yard trimmed into submission. It was generous, full, and thriving. Everything there seemed to want to live. During the renovations, I spent endless hours in that yard. While workers moved in and out, while plans changed, while dust and noise filled the rest of the property, I often found myself outside among the plants, touching petals, trimming dead leaves, standing still and listening. I have always felt a very close connection to nature. I have always believed that if you stand still long enough, nature answers in its own quiet way. Not with words, of course, but with a feeling, with a shift in the air, with the rustle of leaves, with the sound of life continuing around you. I used to think that if I remained quiet enough, the place itself would speak back. So when my husband asked me what we should call the place, I did not feel that I was inventing a name. I felt that the place had already chosen one, and all I had to do was hear it. The name that came to me was Anima, from the Latin word meaning life or soul. That was what the place felt like to me. Not just a business, not just a building, but something alive. Something with a spirit of its own. When the renovations were finally finished, the responsibility for decorating the place fell mostly to me, and I was happy for that. I wanted to honor what the building had been without turning it into something stiff or artificial. In one of the storerooms I found old objects that had clearly belonged to earlier years. There were antiques, mirrors, candle holders, worn pieces that seemed forgotten and yet still full of beauty. Seeing those things gave me an idea. I decided to give the place an Eastern touch, something that would match its history and character. I hung carpets on the walls, placed large cushions on the wooden floors, polished old mirrors until they caught the light again, and brought old candle holders back into use. I wanted anyone who entered Anima to feel not just welcomed, but transported a little, as though they had stepped somewhere touched by another rhythm of life. For the first couple of years, everything went wonderfully. Anima became a popular meeting place. People loved it. They came not only for food and drinks, but for the atmosphere, for the feeling of the place, for the mixture of warmth and history that seemed to settle around them when they sat there long enough. People wanted to work for us too. There was a kind of excitement around Anima in those early years. We felt proud. We felt tired, yes, but in the satisfying way that comes from building something and watching it live. It seemed then that the place had welcomed us just as warmly as we had welcomed others into it. But that changed. I do not mean that business suddenly failed or that customers stopped coming. The change was stranger than that, and at first I did not even understand that anything unusual had begun. Looking back, I think that is often how such things happen. They do not begin with a single dramatic sign that makes everything clear. They begin with a feeling, an incident, something easy to dismiss, something that only later starts to connect with other moments, until a pattern forms. At the time, however, the first real incident came to me in a more direct way. It was around 7 o'clock in the evening one day when I arrived and parked my car outside Anima. During the weekdays, our schedule was simple enough. The cook would come at 4 in the afternoon for an hour and a half to prepare the kitchen, and then return at 8. Apart from my husband and me, the only other person there at that time was usually the bartender. So when I stepped out of my car that evening, I already knew roughly who should be inside and what things should look like. The first thing I noticed was that every light in the bar was on. Not just on, but turned up to the maximum. The dimmer had clearly been set as high as it could go. That alone struck me as strange, because it was not how we normally kept the place. The lighting at that hour was meant to be softer, more controlled, part of the whole atmosphere. Then I saw the girl working that night sitting outside with the front door wide open. I stopped walking for a moment. There was something in the scene that immediately told me something serious had happened. She was not sitting outside casually, not taking a break, not enjoying the evening air. Her posture alone said enough. She looked frightened, frozen by something she did not know how to handle. I remember feeling a heaviness in my stomach before she had even spoken a word. The lights, the open door, her face, all of it together created the kind of picture that makes the mind race ahead before facts have even caught up. When I finally approached and asked what was wrong, she started crying. Not dramatic crying, not the kind done for effect, but real tears from someone who was embarrassed as well as frightened. She kept saying she was afraid I would laugh at her. That detail stayed with me because it told me she herself thought what had happened sounded ridiculous. She was not eager to tell the story. She was ashamed of it. It took me a little while to calm her down enough to speak. I reassured her, told her I was not going to laugh, and eventually persuaded her to come back inside with me. Even then, she entered reluctantly. Once inside, she finally explained what had frightened her so badly. She said she had been hearing crashing noises coming from the kitchen and the bathroom. Not one sound, but repeated sounds enough to make her panic. Then, at some point, she had felt as though something had passed in front of her. She did not describe it clearly as a person or a shadow. It was more a sensation, a movement, something that seemed to cross her space without being fully seen. The way she said it made me suspicious rather than convinced. At that point I still believed I was dealing with nerves, imagination, or perhaps even a panic attack brought on by being alone. I asked her to show me where she had heard the sounds. Part of me wanted to test her. I wanted to see whether she would stick to her story when asked to point things out specifically, or whether she would hesitate and reveal that the whole thing had been one big wave of panic. She pointed again toward the kitchen and the bathroom. But the moment I started walking in that direction, she rushed back toward the front door as if she could not bear to remain near those rooms. I was already losing patience. The first place I inspected was the kitchen. At first glance there was nothing dramatic. Then I noticed some broken glass on the floor. That did not alarm me much. In a working kitchen and bar, broken glass happens. My immediate thought was practical and simple. I assumed she must have set a drinking glass too close to the edge of the kitchen table and knocked it over, and that in her frightened state she had attached the noise to something larger and more sinister. That seemed far more likely than anything paranormal. Annoyed but still trying to stay calm, I moved on to the bathroom, already preparing in my mind to tell her that everything had an ordinary explanation. Then I entered the bathroom. There were more pieces of broken glass on the floor there as well. That stopped me for a moment. I raised my eyes to inspect the room and immediately saw where they had come from. The broken pieces had fallen off the mirror mounted on the left side. For 1 second my heart seemed to stop, not because I believed in anything supernatural at once, but because the sight was so unexpected. I had been ready to find nothing. I had been ready to prove the girl wrong. Instead I found damage in 2 places. Still, logic came back quickly. The broken mirror, I decided, was the explanation. Mirrors age. Fixtures loosen. Things crack and fall. Accidents happen. I grabbed hold of that thought with relief. It gave me a reason to remain calm. So I called out to the girl, trying to sound confident, and told her to come back inside. I found the suspect, I said, even smiling at her when she appeared halfway in the doorway again. Help me collect the pieces. She looked at me as though she did not understand. I told her that the mirror in the bathroom had somehow broken and that these things happen when objects wear out with time. I added that, as for the kitchen, she must have knocked over a glass or something and then panicked when she heard it break. That explanation felt satisfying to me in that moment. It tied the 2 noises together neatly. It made her fear seem childish but understandable. It gave the whole thing a safe shape. But she denied it at once. She insisted she had been outside when she heard the kitchen noise. She said she had not knocked anything over. Then she told me something else in a tone I have never quite forgotten. She said she had felt a cold wind passing by her, almost through her. The way she described it unsettled me slightly even though I did not want it to. She sounded ashamed of saying it, yet certain. And then she said, almost as a vow, that she would never again enter that place first unless one of us was already there. At that point I gave up trying to comfort her properly. I was too irritated by what I still saw as childish behavior, and I did not want to encourage her fear. So I continued cleaning up the place myself. I moved back into the kitchen, collected the broken glass, and tried to focus only on practical tasks. Yet as I worked, I began to feel something I did not like at all. It was the sensation of being watched. It came from a corner of the kitchen, or at least that was how it felt, as if someone unseen stood just beyond the edge of what I could comfortably explain. I told myself at once that this feeling was only the result of her panic affecting me. Fear is contagious. Even when you do not believe the story that frightened someone else, their fear can still enter your body in small ways. That was what I chose to believe. Just to steady myself, I kept talking to her while I worked, as though ordinary conversation could keep the whole thing anchored in everyday life. I swept up the broken glass. I moved around the kitchen. Then I started making coffee. That was when something happened that was much harder to shrug off. I felt what I can only describe as something sitting on my chest. There is no perfect way to explain that sensation to someone who has not felt it. It was not simple anxiety. It was not merely being startled or nervous. It was as though a weight had settled onto my chest from nowhere, pressing in just enough to make breathing more difficult. It happened suddenly and with such physical force that I had to stop for a moment and gather myself. I remember deciding then, very deliberately, that I would ignore it. I would not give it meaning. I would not turn it into a story. I would keep going. And so I did. I finished making the coffee, said nothing about it, and kept moving as though nothing unusual had happened. Less than 20 minutes later, the cook arrived, and with him came my husband. The atmosphere changed immediately the way it always does when more people enter a space. Practical tasks multiplied, voices filled the rooms, and there was no time left for uneasy feelings. Soon enough the evening took over all of us. Customers arrived. Orders came in. Glasses clinked. Food went out. We ran back and forth serving people, handling the usual rush of work that leaves no room for lingering fear. In the movement and pressure of the night, what had happened earlier seemed to shrink. I did not forget it, but I placed it to one side. There was simply too much to do. By the time we closed and finally started our way back home, I thought the strangest part of the evening had already passed. Then my husband said something that changed everything. He complained, in an angry, tired voice, that he was fed up with fixing that freaking mirror for the third time. He was convinced the cleaning lady had been careless with it again. The words hit me in a way I was not prepared for. I felt my heart start pounding almost immediately. For a few seconds I said nothing. I simply let the implication settle inside me. If the cleaner had broken the mirror earlier, then Elisabeth would have seen the pieces the moment she came into the bar that evening. And even if she had somehow missed them, the cook, who had already been there at 4 in the afternoon to prepare the kitchen, would certainly have found them and cleaned them up before leaving and returning again at 8. In other words, the broken mirror could not have been old damage sitting there unnoticed. It had to have happened during that strange time when Elisabeth was alone. The logic I had relied on earlier began to fall apart piece by piece. That realization changed the whole shape of the evening in my memory. Up until then, I had still been arranging events in a way that made them ordinary. A nervous employee. A broken mirror. An accidentally dropped glass. A little panic. Some contagious anxiety. But once I understood that the broken pieces could not have been there before Elisabeth heard the crashing noises, the ordinary explanation became much harder to hold on to. Suddenly the sounds she described lined up too well with the evidence. The kitchen glass. The mirror breaking again. The cold sensation she described. My own feeling of being watched. The pressure on my chest. None of it looked as neat as it had before. And perhaps the most unsettling part was not any single event, but the fact that they all happened together. I sat there on the way home feeling a chill move through me, though I did not say much at first. My husband kept talking, irritated about repairs, annoyed at what he thought was carelessness, still seeing the whole thing in ordinary terms. I wanted to hold on to that. I really did. I wanted to agree with him and let the matter remain frustrating rather than frightening. But something in me had already shifted. I began thinking back over every detail of that evening with much greater attention. The lights being turned all the way up. The girl sitting outside with the door open. Her fear that I would laugh at her. The crashing noises in 2 different places. Her insistence that she had been outside when she heard the noise in the kitchen. The cold wind she felt passing almost through her. The broken pieces on the bathroom floor. The mirror that, according to my husband, had already been repaired more than once. The sensation of being watched in the kitchen. The sudden heaviness on my chest. Once the simple explanation loosened, all those details seemed to gather weight. That night, after we got home, I found it harder than usual to settle myself. It was not just fear, not exactly. It was a disturbance, a feeling that something in the world had shifted slightly out of place. I kept replaying the moment when I had smiled and said to Elisabeth, "I found the suspect," as though logic alone could dismiss what frightened her. I remembered the way she had stood half in the doorway, unwilling to come fully inside. I remembered how certain I had been that she was behaving like a child. And now I was not so sure. What troubled me most was that, in truth, the place had always felt alive to me. I do not mean haunted. I do not mean strange in a dark sense. But from the very beginning, I had called it anima because I felt soul in it, life in it, presence in it. I had loved the old stone walls, the history, the yard that seemed to breathe, the objects from earlier times that had found their place again under my hands. I had believed the place whispered back if one stood still long enough. At the time, I meant that in a beautiful, poetic way. But lying awake after that evening, I found myself wondering whether old places keep more than beauty. Whether history lingers in more ways than one. Whether walls absorbed something from those who lived within them, suffered within them, celebrated within them, and died while belonging to them. The building had been home long before it was business. It had belonged to one family for generations. It had witnessed changes in culture, in ownership, in language, in food, in daily life. It had survived 150 years. The yard behind it grew as though fed by memory itself. The mirrors, the antiques, the candle holders, the carpets, all of it connected present life to past life. I had loved that connection. But after that evening, I also began to respect it differently. In the days that followed, I watched more carefully. I watched how people behaved when left alone in certain rooms. I watched whether anyone else seemed uneasy without wanting to say why. I paid attention to little sounds, to changes in atmosphere, to the subtle ways a place can feel different depending on the hour or who is present. I did not go around telling wild stories or frightening the staff. On the outside I remained practical. But inwardly I was listening. And once you begin listening for such things, you realize how often people sense more than they admit. Some laugh quickly because they are embarrassed. Some refuse to say anything because they fear they will not be believed. Some describe a place as uncomfortable, heavy, or strange without ever attaching stronger words to it. Some feel watched. Some avoid going into certain rooms alone. Some turn all the lights on. The memory of Elisabeth sitting outside with every light blazing stayed with me strongly for that reason. It was such a human act. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just desperate. If a frightened person does not know what else to do, they seek light, air, and an open door. That was exactly what she had done. The more I thought about it, the less her behavior seemed childish, and the more it seemed honest. I also could not let go of the mirror. A mirror repaired for the 3rd time already suggests weakness, yes, but it also suggests repetition, and repetition has its own strange power and memory. Why that mirror? Why the bathroom? Why did the crashing come from both there and the kitchen? Why did I feel watched only after entering that part of the building? Why did the pressure come while I was making coffee, doing something so ordinary it should have anchored me completely in the normal world? None of these questions had clear answers, and perhaps that was precisely why they lingered. If the story ended there, Perhaps I would still have convinced myself it had been nothing more than an unnerving but explainable evening. Yet the truth is that once doubt enters, it changes the way you receive every later incident. It makes you less dismissive. It makes you look back and notice connections you might otherwise ignore. It teaches you that fear and logic are not always enemies. Sometimes logic, followed carefully enough, leads you right back to the very thing you were trying not to believe. That was what happened to me with Anima. I had chosen that name because I believed the place had soul. I had filled it with objects from its past, polished old mirrors, placed cushions on the floor, hung carpets on the walls, and tried to honor its Eastern history. I had spent hours in the yard feeling life in every flower and leaf. I had wanted to care for the place, to listen to it, to help it bloom under our hands. I still loved it. Even after that evening I loved it. But my love became more cautious, more reverent, less romantic. I began to understand that places with deep roots may hold more than charm. Life and soul are not always simple or gentle things. Sometimes they come with mystery. Sometimes with unease. Sometimes with reminders that not everything in an old place belongs entirely to the present. As for that first strange evening, it remained in my mind not because I had seen some clear ghostly figure, but because it pushed me from easy certainty into uneasy honesty. Before that night I would have laughed at the idea that something unexplained might be happening inside Anima. After that night I could not laugh so easily. I had heard the evidence from a frightened girl, found the broken glass myself, felt the strange pressure in my own body, and then learned a fact that removed the safest explanation I had been using to protect myself. There are moments when belief does not arrive as a dramatic conversion. It arrives quietly, through cracks in logic, through details that do not line up cleanly, through the slow realization that dismissal requires more effort than acceptance. That was how it happened for me. I still remember the drive home, the dark road, my husband's irritation, the way his words about fixing the mirror landed in me with such force. I remember sitting there, staring ahead, my mind going back over Elizabeth's face, the kitchen glass, the bathroom mirror, the cold air she described, my own breath catching in my chest. It was as if all the pieces were rearranging themselves while I sat silent beside him. By the time we reached home, I knew something had changed. Not only in the place, perhaps, but in me. I could no longer move through Anima with quite the same innocence. And yet, strangely enough, I did not stop loving it. If anything, the place became even more complex in my heart. It was still beautiful. The yard still flourished. The old vine still stretched its history over us. The mirrors still held candlelight. The cushions, carpets, and stone walls still made the place feel warm and full of character. Customers still came. Laughter still rose in the evenings. Glasses still clinked. Food still carried warmth to tables. Life still filled Anima. But now there was something else too, something difficult to name. A layer beneath the visible one. A sense that the building was not merely a background to our lives, but a participant in them. Perhaps that is why the memory remains so sharp. It was the first evening when Anima stopped being simply ours and reminded me that it had belonged to itself long before we came. Long before our plans, our renovations, our decorations, our hopes. We had brought new life into it, yes, but we had not arrived at an empty shell. We had entered something old, rooted, storied, and perhaps not entirely at rest.